One pistol, 74 years of unbroken service, 4 wars, and a debate that still rips through every gun form, every range, every operator's bar on the planet. Stopping power versus capacity, the 45 ACP versus the 9mm. And right at the center of it all, the most legendary sidearm the United States military has ever fielded, the Colt M1911. This is the story of how one pistol became so deeply embedded in American military DNA that the Army literally fought Congress to keep it. And it all started with a nightmare in the Philippines, where 38 caliber bullets were not enough to stop a charging man with a sword. Let's go back to 1899, the Philippine-American War. The United States has just finished humiliating the Spanish in the Spanish-American War, and now it is turning its attention to the southern islands of the Philippines, a region called Mindanao. And that is where the Moro live, Muslim warriors with a 400-year history of fighting foreign occupiers. The Spanish could not break them. The Americans were about to find out why. The standard issue sidearm for American troops at this point was the Colt M1892, a double-action, 38-long Colt revolver. On paper, it looked like a solid modernization. Lighter than the old 45 caliber single-action revolvers the Army had been carrying since the late 1840s. Faster to reload. More accurate. The Army brass signed off on it in 1892 and called it done. The problem was nobody had tested it against what it was actually going to face. In the jungles of Mindanao, it was about to get a brutal education. The Moro had a tradition, a religious ritual called juramentado. Warriors would work themselves into an absolute frenzy, a state of religious ecstasy fueled by faith, and, according to multiple after-action reports, local stimulants that killed the sensation of pain. Then they would grab their double-edged swords, their bolos, and charge flat out. They would close to within 20 yards of an American position. No fear, no hesitation, just forward. Juramentado was that kind of single-minded violence. And here it gets ugly. The after-action reports coming back to Manila and Washington told the same story again and again. 2 bodies on the ground, a Moro with 5 or 6 rounds in his chest, and a dead American soldier holding an empty .38 revolver. The man had fired everything he had. It was not enough. The .38 long Colt simply did not have the mass behind it to shut down a determined, pain-resistant attacker fast enough. General Leonard Wood, who commanded troops in Moorland, put it bluntly. The 45 caliber revolver stops a man in his tracks, usually knocking him down. The .38 did not. The Army moved fast. They pulled the old 45 caliber single-action revolvers out of storage and reissued them to troops in the Philippines. The heavier bullet worked, but single-action revolvers were slow and clunky, and the Army wanted something better, something semi-automatic, something that fired a 45 caliber round and could put rounds on target faster than any revolver ever could. The clock started ticking on what would become one of the most important firearms trials in American history. In 1904, the Army commissioned the Thompson-Lagarde tests, named after John T. Thompson. Yes, the same John Thompson who would later give us the Tommy gun. These tests were designed to answer one question, scientifically. What caliber does a military sidearm need to be? They tested everything from ballistic pendulums to live cattle and human cadavers. The results were brutal and unambiguous. Thompson's conclusion was direct. The new service pistol should be no less than 45 caliber. Period. End of debate. The Army now had the scientific mandate it needed. Find me a semi-automatic pistol chambered in .45. In January 1907, 6 manufacturers showed up to the trials: Colt, Luger, Savage, Bergman, Noble, and White Merrill. 6 of the best firearms engineers on the planet, all competing for the single most important military sidearm contract in the world. The requirements were grueling: at least a 6-round magazine, a trigger pull under 6 pounds, vertical ejection, easy-to-field strip, and it had to survive everything the Army could throw at it. Most of them did not make it. The Luger jammed in mud. The others broke down under stress. By 1911, it came down to 2: Colt's design, built by the legendary John Moses Browning, and the Savage Model 1907. Both chambered in .45 caliber, both semi-automatic. Both were serious contenders. The final trial took place on March 15, 1911. And what happened next is one of the most famous moments in firearms history. Each pistol was loaded and fired 6,000 rounds. 6,000. Not 100. Not 500. 6,000 rounds, back to back, designed to push these weapons to absolute mechanical failure. The Savage was good. Impressive, even. It fired 6,000 rounds with only 37 malfunctions. For most firearms, that is excellent, but the Colt M1911 fired all 6,000 rounds without a single jam. Not one. 0 malfunctions. During the test, the pistol overheated so badly that the testers dunked it in water to cool it down. It kept firing. Browning's design did not just win, it dominated. On March 29, 1911, the United States Army officially adopted the Colt 45 as its standard issue sidearm, the M1911. Now here is where the real war begins. For the next 74 years, the American military is going to defend this pistol like it is sacred ground. The reason comes down to one of the oldest, most vicious arguments in firearms history: stopping power versus capacity. The .45 ACP versus the 9mm. Let us break down the actual physics. This is not opinion. This is ballistics. The .45 ACP round. It stands for Automatic Colt Pistol. Browning designed it specifically for the M1911. It fires a bullet with a diameter of 0.452 inches. Typical weight, 230 grains. Muzzle velocity, around 850 feet per second, generating roughly 370 to 400 foot-pounds of energy. It is a wide, heavy, slow-moving round, and that is by design. Now compare that to the 9mm. The 9mm Parabellum fires a bullet with a diameter of 0.355 inches. Typical weight, 115 to 147 grains, traveling at 1,100 to 1,200 feet per second. The 9mm is thin, fast, and light. It is nearly 50% narrower than the .45 ACP, and roughly half the weight, but it moves significantly faster. On paper, people look at those numbers and argue. The 9mm has comparable or even higher muzzle energy in some loads. So why did the military carry the .45 for 70 years? Because paper does not bleed. The answer is in what happens when the bullet hits something alive. When a bullet travels through human tissue, it creates two types of damage. The first is the permanent wound channel. That is the actual path the bullet carves through the body. The tissue it destroys permanently. The second is the temporary wound channel. That is the stretch cavity created by the bullet's kinetic energy as it pushes through tissue. It forms and collapses in milliseconds. Here is the critical point. The .45 ACP bullet is nearly 50% wider than a 9mm. When you are firing full metal jacket ammunition, which is exactly what the military uses, there is no expansion on impact. The bullet does not mushroom. It does not open up. It punches through at exactly the diameter it was loaded at. That means the permanent wound channel is dictated entirely by the size of the bullet itself. A .45 ACP full metal jacket round creates a significantly larger permanent wound channel than a 9mm full metal jacket round every single time. This is not a debate. It is geometry. The 9mm has its own advantage. That higher velocity creates a longer temporary stretch cavity. The tissue around the bullet path gets pushed outward faster and harder before it snaps back. Some of that tissue tears, some of it does not. In a combat situation, when you are firing military ball ammunition, you cannot count on temporary cavitation to do the job. You need the permanent channel to hit something vital, and the .45 ACP gives you a bigger window to do that. This is where the stopping power argument really lives. It is not about raw energy numbers on a spec sheet. It is about how much tissue gets destroyed permanently with every round that hits center mass. The .45 ACP, especially in full metal jacket, is simply a more forgiving round. If your shot placement is slightly off, you still have a better chance of cutting something critical. The 9mm demands precision. The .45 ACP is more brutal when you are close, and things are happening fast. But here is the other side of the equation. The M1911 carries 8 rounds. That's it. One magazine, 8 shots, and you're reloading. The Beretta M9 that eventually replaced it carried 15 rounds of 9mm, nearly double the capacity. In a firefight, ammunition capacity is not a theoretical advantage. It's life and death. The FBI ran the numbers on this in the 1980s and the 1990s. Law enforcement officers in real-world shootouts hit their targets roughly 20 to 30% of the time. 20 to 30%. You need volume, you need rounds downrange, and 8 rounds of 45 ACP, no matter how devastating each one is, runs out fast. So the military carried the M1911 through World War I. Over 640,000 pistols were manufactured by the end of that war alone. It went through the trenches of the Somme, the mud of Belleau Wood. Soldiers loved it. The recoil was heavy, but in close quarters combat, when an enemy soldier was coming at you around a corner, that 45 ACP hit like a freight train. Nobody was getting back up quickly after that. World War II. The M1911A1, the updated version with the arched mainspring housing and the longer grip safety, became the most produced American sidearm in history. Millions of rounds were fired across every theater of the war. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of Iwo Jima, American GIS carried that 45 ACP on their hip. It became as much a symbol of American military power as the M1 Garand or the Sherman tank. And through Korea and Vietnam, it kept going. Decades of combat, generations of soldiers. The same basic design, refined but fundamentally unchanged. Vietnam changed things a little. The war in Southeast Asia was close quarters. Tunnels, rice paddies, ambushes at 10 meters. And the 45 ACP was devastating at that range. But Vietnam also taught the military something uncomfortable. Magazine capacity mattered. A lot. The AK-47 carried 30 rounds. The M16 carried 20. And the M1911 carried 8. In a sustained firefight, that number felt very small. The seeds of the replacement debate were already being planted. But it would take another decade before anyone had the political will to actually do anything about it. By the late 1970s, the pressure to replace it was becoming impossible to ignore, and it had very little to do with the pistol itself. It started with NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization had standardized on the 9mm Parabellum as the common sidearm cartridge across all member nations. If the United States was going to fight alongside its European allies, and potentially fight a full-scale war against the Soviet Union in Europe, logistics demanded a common round. You cannot be the only country on the battlefield running a different caliber. Not when ammunition supply lines are your lifeline. Congress got involved in 1978. They issued a direct order to the Department of Defense. Find a new 9mm pistol and replace the M1911. The Joint Service Small Arms Program was created specifically to run the trials. What happened next showed just how badly the Army did not want to let go. The first round of testing was run by the Air Force. The Beretta 92 came out on top. The Army immediately challenged the results, calling the testing unscientific, and demanded its own trials. The Army ran its own tests in 1981 and 1982. It spent $2 million and found no clear winner. The Army told Congress it did not need a replacement. Congress responded by cutting funding for 45 ACP ammunition. They pulled the budget for M1911 replacement parts. They literally starved the old pistol to force the Army's hand. It took until February 14, 1985 for the Army to officially adopt the Beretta 92FS as the M9. 74 years of service for the M1911. The longest run of any standard issue sidearm in American military history. But here's the thing, the story does not end there. The debate between 45 and 9mm is still alive. It is still raging. The FBI switched to 9mm in 2014 after advances in hollow point ammunition closed the wound channel gap. Modern 9mm hollow points expand on impact to roughly the same diameter as 45 ACP rounds. The physics changed. The math caught up, but that is hollow point technology. civilian and law enforcement ammunition, not what soldiers carry into a firefight. The military still issues full metal jacket in most combat situations. And in full metal jacket, the 45 ACP advantage in permanent wound channel has not gone anywhere. The advantage remains. The Marines held on to the M1911 longer than anyone. Special operations units carried it well into the 2000s. The Corps fielded the M45A1, a modernized railgun version of the classic design, chambered in 45 ACP right up alongside the M9. Operators who have been in real firefights know something that spec sheets do not capture. There is a reason the 45 ACP earned the reputation it has. It is not nostalgia. It is not romanticism. It is 74 years of battlefield data. The M1911 was designed by John Moses Browning, one of the greatest firearms engineers who ever lived. It was born from a specific failure, the 38 long Colt's inability to stop charging warriors in the Philippines. It was proven in the most grueling trials the Army had ever run. It fought through 4 wars. It survived 2 decades of political battles just to stay in service. And even after the military moved on, it never truly disappeared. It is still being built, still being carried, still debated, still loved. One pistol, 74 years. No replacement was ever good enough, not until politics and logistics forced the issue. And even now, if you ask the operators who carried both the 45 and the 9mm downrange, a significant number of them will tell you the same thing. Given the choice, in a real fight, with real stakes, they would reach for the 45. That's the M1911. That's why the US military refused to let it go. If this is the kind of content you are into, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We have a lot more deep dives on the weapons, the gear, and the stories behind them coming up on Loadout Archive. Do not miss it.